Hi, this is Kevin at Expanding Hands Music. I've been asked several times if a customer could rehair a Simbo by themselves. The answer is I do not know. It probably depends on the skill level of, I don't even know what skill to apply to that. But skill level and available resources you have tool-wise. So here's a Simbo 18S, which I'm going to demonstrate on. This one is for sale, so I'm not going to cut the hair off, but this is tied on with a synthetic sinew. It's a very strong man-made fiber with wax on it. As you can see, there's a hole in the wood here in the back, and then on the front, under this, the sinew, where it's tied on, the twine, if you want to call it, there's a groove filed in the wood. So I am not going to go into any detail about removing this. I will give a suggestion or two, but it is your own responsibility of how to get it off without damaging the bow. You know, you could use a little tiny pair of scissors and cut through this, because if it's all loose and it can't be, or all the hairs have broken and been bowed away, so you've got to get the tied on part off on each end. So you could, conceivably use some small scissors, or you could conceivably use a razor blade, but that is your choice to do it in the way that does not damage the bow. Okay, so here's a bow that I'm going to hair up. You can see the hole, and you can see the groove filed in the wood at this end. So I have a vise here. This one particularly tilts, but I've put leather on the jaws so it will not mar the finish of the bow. So in my case, that's what I use. You may have some other option. So on this one, I use, on the black bows, I use the black sinew. And I'll tie it around, keep a little tension on it so that it stays in the groove. Tie it once, and then check and see if the ends are the same length. In my case, they're not, so I can pull it a little bit and check it again. Still not quite there. It's hard to see this part in the video. I have a lamp right over me here that helps. Okay, now they're the same length. I snug up that one tie, and then I tie it one more time. Secure that line in place. Now I turn the bow around, clamp it in, and then the hole I showed you in the back, I feed the line through that hole. Once again, trying to center it lengthwise. I get it even first, then I tie it once. Check it for matched length, get that snugged up. Alright, that's close enough. So I'll get that one tie tight, and then I will tie one more time. Okay, now for the next step. Okay, the next step in the way I do it, there's the little eye bolt, and there's the sleeve that the hair goes through. So I take it and kind of pinch it. Can you see how I'm doing there? And I feed it into the eye bolt. And then I do a test fit from the bottom of the bow up through. I want the sleeve to not quite come to the top of the little lip in the back. That's pretty good. I've got about maybe 1/8 of an inch before I hit the little sharp edge there. It's kind of like a little shelf. Okay, now something I do, because I just like the way it works, started doing this about 6 months ago, is I've got a block of paraffin here. And I like to get, you could use a candle or something. I like to get it and put it in the threads of the eye bolt. Now, the horsehair. This is called a hank of horsehair. I don't really know the exact count of the number of hairs in it. I think it's 100, 125 or something like that. I don't know how standard it is. I order mine in hanks as opposed to making the hanks themselves. But I will say that in the end they put a little bit of glue and they tie on the end. From where I order these, it's Mongolian horsehair, so it comes from Mongolia or China, and it's not super solid up there, so I always put some super glue on there, let that dry, and then I mix up some epoxy and then dip it in epoxy and then let that dry. So, you know, if you're using your own hanks, you've got to make sure that the hair stays secure and doesn't pull out, because this hair is not held on like a traditional bow where it's down around a couple of corners inside some holes behind the little doors. Anyway, so I take the hair and the long end, I insert this. Sometimes it's a little tough when you get up to the eye bolt. But if you're getting a hank from me, I'll try to make sure it's the right size. Sometimes if it doesn't, I'll pinch it there and then I can force it through. But I might have to slide the sleeve back a little bit. I might have moved it a little bit too much. Okay, now I've got it sticking out of the sleeve. So what I do is I go underneath, put the eye bolt through the hole. I get the larger of the two washers that came off, put it down first. Then I get the small little lock washer, put that on, and then the brass thumb nut. And I put that on, not too tight, just 2 or 3 turns, because I don't want the eye bolt to draw the hair up into the V. Okay? Now comes a really interesting part with the tying it on, because this can be a little tricky. So I flip the hair up, pretty much about even with the top of the curve of the back of the bow. I wrap the line around the hair and then feed it through, crossing over, and feed it through the hole. Put some tension on it. You've got to pretty much keep your thumb or a finger on there the whole time. You really need to keep tension on this, because you'll need to get it tighter and tighter and tighter. It's very important that it is very tight, but you don't want to break the bow tightening it. Alright, so I've got kind of a double wrap going there now. I'm going to do that again. This process has evolved as I've been making these bows now for a few years, as I'm figuring out what holds it on better. So after I've gotten about 3 on there, then I came up with this other thing to help secure it, which is a little tricky. You got to make sure everything is tight. Pull it tight. You don't want to wait too long and have too many wraps and then pull it tight, because it can't work it. So now I take a string and put it behind this, crossing over, and behind that crossing over. This is where it probably gets hard to see. And this crossed over one I put behind the hair on that where the little shelf is, and then the other one I feed through from its side. This puts a different kind of tension on it, so it crosses over in the back. Then I cross it in the front, and then I feed it through the back hole. As it's crossed over, keeping tension on it, keeping it tight. Sometimes I'll do the thing with the crossover in the back twice. I'll probably do it again right here. Crossover, crossover. Sometimes it gets too full and you can't fit the line behind the hair at the bottom where the little kind of shelf thing is. Alright, crossover. Feed it through, keeping it quite tight. So you want to feed this through pretty much as many times as you can, but you're going to need to leave 3 or 4 inches. You need to stop when you've got 3 or 4 inches left, because you need to be able to tie it. Okay, I'm about where I want to be. That's probably about 3 inches, 3.5 inches. So now I'll kind of pull it off to one side just a little bit. I tie it once, And I'll tie it again. Then I tie it again. I usually do it about 4 times, wiggling it, pull it left and right. I want to really snug those knots down as best as possible. The wax really helps lock it in. Alright, that's about 4. I kind of give it a push. I use a little Swiss Army knife, and I don't cut it off exactly at the knot. I leave about 1/8 of an inch. Make sure you don't scratch the bow, and make sure you don't cut the horsehair. Do not do that. Then I throw those pieces away. Alright, well, in a moment we'll flip it around to the other end. Okay, now we'll flip it around to the other end. So I loosen it there. So the hair is, at this point, I flip the bow upside down. Okay, so just for the purposes of doing this, I'll kind of line that up. Get it back there and snug it up in the vise. It's gonna need some pulling, so I've got to get it tighter. It's where it really comes in handy to have the leather on the jaws so it's not scratched up. Doesn't dent your bow. Okay, so now the process I do here, I comb it out because I want to. So I've got a fairly, I don't know if you can see how small the tines are on this comb, but it's fairly small. So I comb it a few times. Try to comb it straight without twisting. Sometimes you'll find a shorter hair that won't reach. You can worry about that later. So now you've got to, just while tilting the hair a little bit, you've got to fit it between the two side extensions of wood that help hold the hair in place. But you want the hair to be the full width. So once I get it in there, I also comb it forward again to see if it looks twisted. And in this case, it is a little bit twisted. So I'll see if I can straighten that, because I don't want it to be twisted. It'll tension up better if not. Okay. There, that's pretty good. I try to keep it all fairly tight. And it's kind of tough because you can't really get your fingers on all the different hairs at once. So now here's a strange process I came up with for there you'll see some, if you got materials to attempt to rehair from me, aside from the hair and the sleeve and whatever, there'll be some very thin wire. And this is a tricky thing to do because you don't want to twist the hair in the process, but this also helps hold the thing in place, the hair in place. So I wrap this wire as close together and as tightly as I can. In this case, it's about 1/2 inch down from the tip of the bow. And it's a fairly involved process to rehair on these things, but so once you get this wrapped all the way around, hopefully there'll be some, you can see it in the camera, it's not too close or out of focus. Can you see that? Can you see this wire right here? Now I pull it under. What I want it to do is be even with the knot and the groove where the line is tied on. And I slide it to that place. And I get these pliers. Probably any pliers will do. These are parallel jaw pliers, which I really like. Old ones. Anyway, you crush down the wire to really, the whole time you keep the tension, some moderate tension on the hair. You want to make that tight. Alright, now here comes another tricky thing, because if you do this wrong, you could cause problems. Super glue time. I have the super glue. I put it right at the top of the wire and on top of the wire. I'm not too worried about underneath, but I do not want this super glue to wick up and get to the area where it turns over the wood, because it won't work properly. And you have to go around the back side, go down. Better to have a little too much. Okay, set that down, still keeping tension the whole time. And I have these squeeze clamps. These have these jaws on the end that pivot so you can keep it flat. So what I do is make sure this is below where any super glue would flow, and I clamp it to the horseshoe. This acts as a weight, which is the purpose of this. It keeps tension on the hair and weight. I do that, and then I just let it hang while that super glue dries. We'll tie it on next. Okay, it's time to tie the hair on the front end. Previously I'd mistakenly put the brass thumb nut and washer on here when it should have been stainless on a black one. So I caught myself and fixed it. Alright, so now we flip the bow over. It's been drying probably close to an hour. I clamp it in fairly far back, and this is probably the tightest yet because I'm really going to have to put some force on it. So, okay. So I've got all this to hold on to. The two pieces of twine are hanging on either side. The tough part here is I've got to put it in between the tying, in between the wood and the hair without stretching the hair out. So I try to get a good bit of tension, feed the string between the hair. You got to make sure not to catch any hairs. Every now and then I do, and then I have to start over again. So I want to go under, between the hair and the wood, and over, going over where I wrap the wire on. That's where the glue is, which should be pretty much over the groove in the wood. Go under and over again. After you get one rapid, you can kind of hold it if you the hair kind of stays in place if you keep tension on the string. So I go about 3 times for each side, over and under, making sure I didn't catch any hair, and I make it pretty tight. I'm not going to answer that phone. Then I pull the hair, get some tension on that, try to get it to get out tight. Now a tricky thing is I do the same. Now I'm on the top side. I'm going to do the under cross. Fights me a little bit here because of the tightness of it. So I lift up the hair, I put that under, keep that tight, and then put this under the front. You really can't see this in what's going on in the video here, but because of the angle of the camera. Put this, so I'll cross that over again, pull that tight once again, and trying to push that with my finger. I want to have as much tension on the hair as possible because it really won't be that tight. The tightening will come up in another step. So I'll wrap this as many times as I can. And in this situation you want to leave about 4 inches left to tie with because of the tight space. I tie with the knot in between the hair and the wood, on the bottom side of the wood, so that it's not sticking up. I could do it on the top. I don't know that it really matters. It might be better. It's a cleaner look on top, but I'm starting to think maybe it's not the best idea because it's so hard to do the other way uniformly. So on this one, I'm going to tie it on the top, slightly to the side instead of straight up. Once, make it tight. Again, and then you pull it back and forth because you don't want any slop, any slack in this. All the strings should be very tight. So maybe 4 times. Then I will, here, let me see if I can lift this up and get a different view. If you can see that, it may be too blurry. Now I'm going to cut the black, the twine off, leaving about 1/8 of an inch, and kind of push that down. It kind of sticks to itself. Let me see if I can change the camera angle here because I'm going to cut the excess hair off now. Just some regular scissors. One thing I really try to be careful not to do is scratch the paint on the especially on the black ones, because I want it to stay black. So I lift this up and probably leave about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. Keep tension on it, cut it. And one even stroke. And there you have, so far, there's still a hair tightening and applying some rosin. But so you can see that it's kind of floppy. Some are tighter than others. It's really hard to have even tension on all the hairs since they're of different diameters. Alright, we'll tension it next. Okay, here we are about to tighten up the hair, as you can probably see if it'll focus on it. I use a heat gun. Some traditional bow makers use a candle or fire of some sort, different methods for different people. So several things you have to consider here. This sleeve is actually heat shrink tubing. You do not want to get it hot, because then it will shrink and crush the hair, and the hair won't spread out the way you need it to. You have to keep the heat gun moving. You do not want to leave it stationary. You don't want to get it too close. So it takes many passes, turning it over. Always keep the heat gun moving. Don't get it any closer than maybe 2 inches at the most, and that can be risky. But as it tightens, the heat makes the hair shrink. And some of the coarser hairs take longer to shrink. Then after it starts to get a little bit tighter, then I kind of separate it with my fingers, because the heat mainly gets to the outside hairs. So as you see, it's all loose again, or some of them are loose again. I'll go through that process several times. And in the process, a weak hair or two might break when the heat hits it. Not a big deal, I'll just remove them, or very, very carefully cut them individually off at each end so that they're not in the way. See, I get near the heat shrink, but I do not let the heat get on it, because I do not want it to shrink. Let's see here, I've got a little frizzy hair that was going to need to come out. So I'll kind of fluff it again, separate them. It's getting tighter and tighter. And there's essentially no tension on this. I don't want to tighten it with tension. I want to tighten the hair with no tension. Once the hairs stop popping out when you separate it, it feels pretty firm. So there's a couple there. You get those. It can be a lengthy process, but it's better to be careful and do it correctly. If you rush into it, either it won't be tight enough, or you might possibly break or burn the hairs, and you have to start over. That's pretty firm. Heat gun is very hot. I'm in my shop now, so I will lay that on the concrete floor to cool. And see if I don't have the knife in my pocket. Sometimes you can just pull one. It's better to cut them, but it's pretty tight and pretty even. Now I'm going to apply some rosin. Well, I've tried many different rosins. This is a Kaplan from Diodario. I kind of like it because it's got this little spring-loaded case, but I'm not promoting anything in particular. So, now the slow process. Sometimes I'll, if there's not a lot of tension, I will add some before I start putting rosin on. So this can take a while. I usually do that and then I put the rosin underneath. I just like to ship them with a little rosin on there so it'll work right out of the box. Hopefully that doesn't bother anybody that has their own rosins that they prefer. All the way back to the where the sleeve is. Then there's a base right here, so I'm starting to grip the strings. Sometimes this process loosens up a few of the hairs and I go back and I retighten them with the heat gun. These all look, oh, there's one little loose one there. And that's with a little bit of tension, not a lot. Alright, now let's spin this thing around and see how it reacts on a cymbal. So it has moderate grip. I'll probably stop, add just a touch more. Okay, so that is the process. I did some things a little bit slower here, but I would say these bows are very much underpriced, because if you see how long that process took, and that had nothing to do with the building of the wood part of the bow and applying the finish and all of that. So there you go.